the World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. We're in the company of Aaron Zaleski, Paris correspondent for the Daily Beast. How are you? All right. And Sylvain Chassagny, bureau chief for the Financial Times. Welcome back. Welcome as well to Stéphane Siemens, correspondent for Spiegel Online. And we love visitors on this show. So Maeve McMahon, usually in Brussels. You took the train down. Only an hour, right?
Yeah, it's just around the corner. Fantastic.
Our Brussels correspondent, our first time in the studio.
Yeah, it's
amazing.
very strange.
All right. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag World This Week. No apology, but a moving speech by the first sitting U.S. president to visit Hiroshima.
71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself.
Stéphane Siemens, this visit to Hiroshima, 71 years in the making.
Yeah, it took a long time, 11 presidents before him, to get to the point to at least appear in Hiroshima. Others have done before, like Clinton and Carter, I think. I think symbols count a lot in this show up, and even if he didn't go as far as excuse America for what has happened in Hiroshima, the fact that he was there, that he talked to the survivors, the Hikobisha, I think that really meant a lot. It doesn't mean that everything's fine between the US and Japan. I think even 7 decades later, they're not friends, they're just partners. And the presence of the US in Okinawa is still resented by a lot of Japanese.
The U.S. military presence there. Aaron Zaleski, it's interesting to see how the U.S. media has reacted to going to Hiroshima.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a really big deal in the U.S. Again, it's the first sitting U.S. president who's gone, and also the first one who, no, he didn't apologize, as you said, but he acknowledged the loss of life, and I think it was 140,000 or 200,000 people who died, and laid a wreath, so sort of made a gesture of public mourning for the victims. And I think, no, he didn't apologize, but he did acknowledge what had happened and the tragedy of what had happened. And then there were, of course, there are other, there's a contingent in the U.S. that, he shouldn't go, and he shouldn't say anything, he shouldn't apologize. But I think that was really in the minority. I think most people look at it as a positive step.
Lots of reactions from the survivors that he talked to, some saying that actually his speech was better than an apology. Before he arrived, one survivor of Hiroshima saying that he was beyond asking for an apology.
An error that led to a catastrophe. We're not interested in splitting hairs with the US.
And Sylvain Chassagny, that's interesting. They're saying they don't want an apology as such, some of these survivors. And it is interesting that acknowledging and apologizing are two different things.
I guess so, and I think I mostly agree with you, but I think it would have been very powerful if he had apologized. I think it fell short of an apology, because it would, after all, there is a debate, and I think historians have come, they have dug up, and there is a debate, and people have recognized now that the bombings of civilians may not have had, such a big impact on the outcome of the war, after all. And so I think, he would have been a very powerful gesture before leaving. And especially from, obviously I understand the politics at home and the difficulty, and I think it's also a generation thing. I think, I think it could have been more powerful.
But as the victim said there, the acknowledgement on him, the fact that he was there, that was already big enough, perhaps. And one man who certainly has an eloquent way of words is, of course, Barack Obama. He was definitely the right president for that job, even though I agree that it took a long time coming. It should have come a long time before. But he's got a nice way of words, and I think he really got his message across there to the victims and their families that were there today.
And I think in a way it's also Obama wrapping it up, right? Wrapping up his own time. I mean, the trip to Vietnam, reconciling with the former enemy, the trip Cuba. I think even the deal with Iran. I think he wants to go. Also prepares his own way out into history.
Right, and I was going to say that there is this sense that it is a goodbye tour. It was his last G7. And perhaps his vision of multilateralism will go with him, Aaron Zaleski.
Hopefully not. we're hoping not. But that could be possible.
And there was certainly the sense at that G7 summit that was hosted by Japan's nationalist prime minister that in other parts of the world, certainly there is that tension. The summit, by the way, kicking off at an ancient Shinto shrine. A shrine dedicated to the imperial family. It continued with condemnation of Beijing's territorial ambitions in the South China Sea. That drew a reaction in kind.
Japan kept hyping the South China Sea issue and exacerbating tensions. It does no good for stability and goes against the role of the G7 as a platform for discussing economic governance. China expresses a strong dissatisfaction about Japan and its G7 summit.
Strong dissatisfaction about Japan and the G7 summit. There were some saying when we debated on this on Thursday, and some saying, why does the G7 not have countries like China in it? In fact,
yeah, that's an issue. I agree. Given the power and their economic weight, that's a big debate.
I'm sure they certainly would have liked to have been there, as we can see from that. But I guess if they're not similar to the other democracies that were there, I guess those that were there in the room today and who are at this G7, they don't feel that China's ready to sit around the table at this G7 forum.
I think there's always the sense that G7 is also a summit or a club of common values. And of course, that's why Russia is no longer there. It got ousted after the Ukraine invasion. But I think the idea is that China certainly has different values than the rest of the team.
Right. And then, of course, there's the issues between Japan and China, and Prime Minister Abe himself, a staunch nationalist. We've seen this ratcheting up of rhetoric over the past years, and it was something that certainly came up. And on that point, I just want to draw the contrast. This coming Sunday, the German Chancellor will join the French President in eastern France to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First Battle of Verdun, where fighting cost around 300,000 French and German lives. These images from 1984, the then President François Mitterrand and Chancellor Helmut Kohl. And you have the sense, Stefan Siemens, that when you look at the language that was used at Hiroshima this Friday, that the talking about this together is brand new, whereas between France and Germany, it's been going on for decades.
Well, the reconciliation between Germany and France goes ways back. All the way back to right after the war, with the creation of the Montanunion and this union, which preceded the European Economic Community. So this is a whole different ballgame. But still, I mean, the symbol of 84 holding hands, it's gone down in history as one of those moments which stick to your mind very much as Willy Brandt kneeling down in Warsaw, again acknowledging. So in a way, that's where Obama fell a little bit short of those preceding images. But I mean, then Japan itself hasn't come clear with its own history. If you think, mentioned China a second ago, if you think what the Japanese have done while occupying Asia and China, they've never acknowledged the war crimes they did there.
And perhaps they could take some tips really from Germany, who's been a bit of an example in the last few decades of this whole Vergangenheitsvergeltung and this coming to terms with their past and recognising that they've committed terrible crimes in the past and actually dealing with it and dealing with it through humour and various different ways that Japan could perhaps take and the US today could take.
Not with this acting premier. Abe is as you said, a nationalist, and he even wants to rewrite the peace constitution, which was started and inaugurated after the war, which says no military power, no engagement beyond their own borders. So I think Japan is turning a page to a more aggressive stand.
All right, we're talking about nationalism, and it is creeping in on this continent as well. For 31,000 votes, Western Europe this week avoided seeing its first far-right head of state since World War II. The former head of Austria's Greens 72-year-old Alexander Van der Bellen edging the Freedom Party's Norbert Hofer in a runoff where the mainstream centre-left and centre-right were eliminated in the first round. The pistol-packing Hofer, he carries a Glock reportedly on his person, has spoken in the past of a Muslim invasion. He's defeated, but he's calling it a victory. Maeve McMahon, the results were announced Monday afternoon after they read counted all those absentee ballots. I suppose where you were in Brussels, you could hear the sighs.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been definitely on the minds of everyone all weekend. There was a lot of worry among people I'd been speaking to, and of course Jan-Claude Juncker had kind of indirectly said that he didn't like that.
He weighed in.
Yeah, and he endorsed Alexander Van der Bellen, the Green candidate who won in the end, that economist. There was people extremely, extremely worried in Brussels that man, Norbert Hofer, might become the president of Austria, and therefore they would have to given him this VIP treatment every time he comes to Brussels, because he made his point clear that he was very anti the way things were being run in Brussels, and he was going to change that, and he was planning on coming to pay a visit very soon. And he is, of course, chums with Marine Le Pen and her the Europe of Freedom and Nations party that was set up quite recently in the European Parliament. He has a colleague that sits on that, some 39 MEPs sit on that party. So that would have been the party he would have been affiliated with every time he visits Brussels. He would have been holding meetings with them. This party always sits on the far right of the hemicycle. They don't get on too well with the rest of them. So massive, of course.
Austria's a small country. What is it? 8.3 million people.
8.3 million, yeah.
Yet, for those 31,000 votes, it would have had a huge impact. What impact would it have had, for instance, on the Brexit campaign?
Well, potentially. I mean, we are seeing the consequences of this, crisis of, identity, created with, by this refugee crisis. So, and we're seeing this, and this crisis, it's a crisis of identity, is also playing out in the Brexit campaign. This is, the Brexit debate is more and more around immigration, identity, more than economic, consequences. Because I think now the Remain camp has kind of won the argument on the economic front. But this is all about identity, immigration. Austria is a tiny country, but they've taken on 100,000, 90,000 refugees, and it's a big impact. So yes, it would have had a big impact on the Brexit campaign. It would have had a big impact in France as well. It would have, the Front National would have felt boosted, by
they got the congratulations of Marine Le Pen.
But in a way, they are boosted. That's the thing. Yeah. It was really too close for comfort, right? I mean, in a way, they've kind of won. I mean, yes, we are avoiding all the practicalities, the difficult, attitudes, in Brussels. But in essence.
And that's why it's not the time for complacency now in Brussels. And I'm sure they were in celebration mode on Monday night, but that should be short-lived, because the reality is that vote on Monday was also a vote against the European Union and Europe. Absolutely. It's not necessarily that all those people that voted on Sunday and on Monday via postal vote are racist, for example, or they agree with a lot of the roots of that party, the Freedom Party in Austria. But they have a problem with the way the European Union is being run right now, like a lot of people. And that's why we're seeing as well this tension as well in Britain with the referendum coming up.
How much of it is, kick the bums out?
I think that definitely plays into it. I think I've brought this up in previous broadcasts, that there is, when people are threatened with a sudden change, and the refugee crisis is bringing in a massive change around Europe, people get very nostalgic, especially on the far right. I see it in the US as well, not for refugees, but for other reasons. And they sort of look back, we want, for instance, Trump's campaign is based on Make America Great Again. So they're sort of looking backwards, they're afraid to move forwards. And they see the change, the newness, in this case it's the refugees, as sort of, it's eroding what Europe was, or it's eroding what Austria used to be. And it's a threat to them.
All right. And Sylvain Chassagny mentioning next year's presidential election in France, the far right on the rise across the EU. It's anyone's guess how the National Front will fare. This graphic courtesy of The Economist, and we can see this is just since January of 2013 how much far-right parties have gone up in voting intentions throughout Europe. Is there a ceiling, Stefan Siemens, where people like say, we wanted to send a protest, but maybe we're going too far? Or is the sky the limit for?
I think in Austria that was a reflex, right? You have a party which is right wing or far extreme right, which has made itself acceptable. They all campaign about being anti-establishment, but meanwhile, they are very much established in Austria for the last 40 years. And they have made coalition with the Social Democrats, let's say in Burgenland, which is that area close to Hungary. So they are kind of the acceptable, nice face of an ugly ideology behind it. And they have banked on something else. You said the Islam, immigration, and what is the third one? Immigration, Islam, and ideology. So, but nevertheless, I think the today Austria is split no longer in left and right, but also in top and bottom. There's a whole lot of people who feel that the established politics, the established parties do not longer represent what the people at large feels, and that's a reflection we have in France, and that's something we have to face in Germany too, with the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, which exactly banks on the same feeling of uneasiness and on feeling that this type of democracy, which is ruled after World War II, is no longer working.
All right, that call to redraw political fault lines on the hashtag world this week. One viewer saying that Alexander Van der Bellen, the president-elect, needs to reach out to the right-wing voters. We're talking about redrawing political fault lines. We're going to see the crisis in France, especially inside of the left, when we come back. You're watching The World This Week.